Welcome to the podcast on North American literature hosted by the Research Group Studies in American Literature and Culture from the University of Granada. Hi, I'm Encarni, an Erasmus student currently living in Ireland, and I've noticed that there has been a lot of different subjects and new essays um, being studied in my hometown, and I'm feeling quite homesick. And this, even though it has been a great experience and I'm really enjoying my classes here, I really wanted to know about how things are going there. And yeah, I think this is gonna be a great chance to see an update on these differences through between countries. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous and I don't know what to say. Okay, so today, in this beautiful afternoon now, we are going to be talking with Sofia Sabiote, who has been taking North American Literature 1 with a wonderful professor, Miriam Santiago, and has a lot to tell us about a topic of great interest. Thank you very much for joining us, Sofia. How are you today?
Hello, I'm great. It's a pleasure to be talking to you. We miss you so much at class, and I just know that you would have loved this class. And I hope you're learning a lot in Ireland and having a great experience there.
Thank you, Sophia. I am having a wonderful time. I'm really enjoying being surrounded by this beautiful culture and having the opportunity to learn this language from a different perspective. Okay, so enough about me. Getting to the topic, if I'm not mistaken, your research was focused on proving the influence of okay, let me get this right because it's going to be tricky. Um, Olaus Equianus, the interesting narrative of the life of Olaus Equiano, or Gustavus Vasa, the African, written in 1789, on Tony Necates Bambara's 1972 short story The Lesson. Okay, I think I got it. Um, what was the selection process of both texts? Because I was told that the introduction of AI tools was mandatory for the development of your essay, which is unheard of, and I was wondering if you incorporated them when choosing the texts that were to be analyzed.
after verifying that the work corresponded with the author, I ended up choosing the lesson, a short story written by Equiano Bambara, since the narrator is a young black girl, and I considered that I could establish a comparison between the two narrators and thus develop the influences of Equiano on Bambara, since both narrative voices are black children placed in white environments, fitting the figure of the innocent child. And my main argument is that Equiano makes use of the literary motif of the ingenue as a satirical device in order to denounce the institution of slavery. And I wanted to explore this influence on the work of Bambara in the lesson, and how she uses the same literary motif of the innocent child in order to create satire and address social and economic inequalities in the black community. So yes, I did use ChatGPT in order to select the corpus that I was going to use as primary sources. And since I also needed to incorporate AI into the essay and research, because one of the aims of this research was to prove how deeply flawed and mistaken ChatGPT is, I asked ChatGPT for context, for cultural, historical, and aesthetic context of the works that I wanted to analyze. And after verifying everything that ChatGPT gave me, I ended up with such different paragraphs, which proves how deeply flawed and mistaken this tool is. And also, in terms of writing, ChatGPT provides paragraphs that feel really impersonal, almost robotic, and always including part of the input. And since I asked for two different contexts, I could compare, and the structure that I used for two completely different authors was basically the same.
I think it's really astounding how many people resort every day to ChatGPT when it's such a deeply flawed tool. I mean, there's a huge debate about this, about using it and not using it, and how it must be used, and what the repercussions it has on the environment, and a whole lot of things that we don't think about. Okay, so the real question is, going back to your research, could you tell us about the authors Equiano Bambara and the context in which they created their works? Because I think both are pretty unknown for our listeners, including myself, which I have not heard about. So I think your account is really revealing in that aspect, and I would love to hear more.
They were also pretty unknown to me before. Okay, so I'll provide some context. Equiano was a freed slave. So when he was a child in Africa, he was captured and enslaved. He was taken to the United States, and he was freed after he bought his freedom. And later, he traveled to England, and when he was living in London, he decided to write and later published the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano. All of this happened in the late 18th century in Enlightenment, and we need to take into consideration that this is the height of the transatlantic slave trade and the abolitionist movement. Equiano's work was very important. It gained great popularity, and it challenged pro-slavery arguments, presenting an account of the horrors of enslavement. It was so relevant that it was quoted during the proceedings of an inquiry into slave trade at the British Parliament. Authors of slave narratives, just like Equiano, embraced the Europeans' Enlightenment dream of reason and the American Enlightenment dream of civil liberty. The 18th century is very much concerned with reason and order and a desire for clarity and regularity and restraint. And Equiano took advantage of this concern with reason to justify the status of black people as humans, arguing that they possess reason, which manifested itself through reading and writing. And in this century, preoccupied so much with social order, satire thrives. It is through satire that Equiano is able to criticize and denounce the institution of slavery. In the case of Equiano Bambara, she wrote within the context of the civil rights movement and the Black Arts movement, which sought to create politically charged works that would inspire collective action and pride in Black identity. In fact, the lesson is contained in a collection of stories named Gorilla My Love, which was published in 1972 and followed Bambara's success with her Black feminist anthology, The Black Woman, in 1970.
You have mentioned that the focus of your research was the use of the ingenue narrator in both literary works as a satirical device to address problematics of the Black experience. Could you tell us more about the ingenue narrator?
Well, of course. A literary motive is a recurring idea in literature. Thus, the literary motive of the ingenue is a construction created by the author that allows him to present a different perspective of reality by means of the innocence of a child. And satire is criticism, and it doesn't always have to be hilarious. In both narratives, the character, the figure of the innocent child, describes initially their environment as civilized, and later this character is placed in an unfamiliar environment, and is through the reactions and descriptions of the unfamiliar environment that this satire is created. Also, the journey motif is present in both texts. The main character goes through an adventure and travels to a final destination. There's a traditional association between the travel narrative and the ingenue narrator, since both narrators share some attributes. Both encounter a new place with naivety and objectivity, and a constant contrast between the unfamiliar and the familiar.
In which particular aspects of both texts did you focus to develop the argument for your thesis?
Okay, firstly, obviously, I focus on the ingenues and Olaudah Equiano, the narrator, and Sylvia, who is the narrator of the lesson. And secondly, I focus on the portrayal of white people, their customs, and the environment in both literary works. And this is provided by means of the focalization of the ingenue narrators. And finally, the social satire created through the comparison and contrast of the familiar and unfamiliar, as I said previously, and how the criticism is constructed.
Could you elaborate on the portrayal of white people by means of the ingenue narrators? Maybe many listeners are wondering about focalization. Could you clarify it for us?
Of course, focalization in literature refers to the perspective through which the narrative is presented. So, for example, in the case of Olaudah Equiano, the narrator, he is a child who lives in his tribe in Africa and presents, firstly, his environment as civilized, and obviously this portrayal differs greatly from savages, which is the idea that white people have of black people living in Africa. Equiano's tribe is organized and possesses a justice system and exhibits signs of culture, and they're rational. And through these similar aspects between white and black culture, the reader engages, but also the difference add to the engagement. However, when Equiano arrives near the coast and is sold from black slavers to white slavers, the reader is finally confronted with a portrayal of white people from the perspective of Equiano, who considers their customs completely unfamiliar, and he is alienated by them. Equiano presents white people as barbarian through his perspective, and he suspects that they're cannibals that are gonna eat him. He's truly scared of them. So, through the perspective of Equiano, the intended reader, who is white people, interprets something which is familiar, the customs and the appearance of white people, as unfamiliar. The narrator presents white people as savages of brutal cruelty, emphasizing their characters as infrahuman and thus demanding for black people the status of human. In the lesson, the narrator, Sylvia, constructs the story as a memory, and she uses African American vernacular, implying that she is Afro-American, even though it's never specified in the text. And her linguistic choices, like oral and everyday speech, are used in order to leave impressions of her neighborhood. Sylvia shows attitude of indifference towards the difficult conditions of her neighborhood because it's her reality and she's accustomed to it. However, when her parents force her to spend a summer day on a visit guided by Mrs. Moore, who is the school teacher and has had an access to an education and wants the children to know the social and economic inequalities between the slums and the poorer neighborhoods and the wealthy neighborhoods. Sylvia would rather spend her day doing something else. When Sylvia arrives with Mrs. Moore and the rest of the children of Harlem on Fifth Avenue, she is confronted by the wealthiness of the neighborhood. The feeling of alienation is highlighted when the children approach a toy store and learn the prices of the items exhibited there. There is juxtaposition, and juxtaposition is a literary device that means contrast of comparison of two things that are different between the expensive nature of the items and the scarce means of the children emphasize the inequality. Therefore, the broken expectations reiterate the distance that exists between the wealthy white people of Fifth Avenue and the black children from the slum. And finally, this contrast forces Sylvia to reflect about it.
Well, certainly the way in which these authors, which contributed greatly to African American literature, make visible and discuss relevant problematics for the Black community is very inspiring, and I personally thank you for sharing your research with us. It's been a wonderful time, and I've learned so much, and I've had so much actual fun hearing about that. So thank you.
Oh, thank you for such sweet comments. I had so much fun, and I hope that also our listeners found the research interesting.